Hi there, Stu Fenton here again, and today we're looking at section 3 of the ChemSex Knowledge series. And today we're going to be looking at the different approaches to helping someone who either wants to change or stop their ChemSex behavior. Now, when we're trying to help someone who wants to change their ChemSex behavior, what we're generally doing is looking at the behavior on a continuum from what we call harm reduction to abstinence. But before we go into this in more detail, a health professional needs to identify where the person is actually at on their journey. So I spoke in a previous video about Dane Griffiths, who works at the Gay Men's Sexual Health Alliance in Toronto. And one of the workshops he did at the Paris ChemSex conference last year was looking at where a gay man is on their journey to wanting to change their behavior. And the 5 different areas that he said you can speak to a gay man about when they're looking to change their behavior is guys, first of all, number 1, who don't want to change their crystal meth or chemsex behavior. Number 2, guys who are maintaining pleasurable and sustainable use over a long period of time. 3, guys who are struggling to maintain pleasurable or recreational use or are experiencing a range of adverse health and well-being outcomes. 4, guys who may be finding themselves moving between zone 1 and zone 2 unexpectedly or rapidly, or people who may be switching back and forth between zone 1 and 2, depending on changing circumstances with the events of the chemsex they're engaging in. And the final one is guys from any of the above zones who decide chemsex is not for them, and they are looking at changing their behavior completely or abstaining completely. And it's going to be important when you're doing motivational interviewing with the client to establish, does this person, from what they're telling you, want to try a harm reduction approach or become completely abstinent? I'm going to talk a little bit now about the unique needs of a client, but before I do, I just want to give an overall name to the clients that we're dealing with. And typically in chemsex literature, we call that BTMSM. That means bisexual, transgender, or men who have sex with men. And just so you're not confused when I'm talking about these clients, that is the term I will use, BTMSM. Initially working with any BTMSMs, there are several areas that are going to be quite important for you to focus on. And the first one is basic and vital information. So this means being able to ascertain anything to do with their chemsex behavior that is really relevant or figural at the time. So their sexual behavior, their physical and mental health, whatever it is they're presenting with that, and as well as any other information you can gather from their chemsex behavior. So it could be the length of time that they party for, whether they're a daily user or a binge user. It could also include what drugs do they not use, how much of a drug they use over a period of time. It could include their sexual behavior, how many sexual partners they have on a binge or a chemsex episode, and this sort of thing. The second area is motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a person-centered approach which has the therapist or the counselor exploring with the client and giving them the power to tell you what their goals are and where they are at with their chemsex experience. The next area I call connecting. Connecting is when a chemsex engager who's looking for help is working with a counselor, and the counselor is trying to connect them with a tribe or with a group of people that is going to support them, because it is very rare that doing this on your own is going to get you effective results. So if it's a person who's choosing abstinence, then it's highly likely they're going to choose a 12-step program such as Crystal Meth Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And it may also involve a gay men's group or a discussion group, something like this. If it's someone who's choosing abstinence, they're also going to need a tribe of some sort. And there are many examples of this. One I'll speak of a bit later is the Le Spot organization, both in Paris and Marseille. But for people who are approaching chemsex from a harm reduction perspective, they too can find gay men's support groups and harm reduction support groups. And many organizations throughout Europe and the UK now are offering these. A little bit later in this video, I'm going to talk about different harm reduction tools and strategies that you can offer to a client who's wanting to change their chemsex behavior. But for the counselor or the therapist who's working with them one-to-one, some of the things you should be looking out for are whether they've had a high number of partners, how often they're participating in sex parties or chemsex episodes. You might have to look at the fact that they may have a low knowledge or understanding of safe injecting practices or safe using practices, both with GHB and crystal meth. You might need to educate them around HIV transmission and also other STIs. And looking also at how, or understanding for the therapist, what it means to sexualize injecting or slamming, because this is actually quite a common feature of chemsex. And sexualizing slamming or injecting means that people can almost become addicted to the practice itself. They get very turned on by the syringe or the tourniquet or just the culture, any part of the culture. It could be the rush too that they get moments after they inject the drug. So what exactly is harm reduction? Harm reduction is an approach to helping people, especially in this case with chemsex, getting them to reduce their drug-related harms or their sexual behavior-related harms. It's about meeting the client where they're at and being able to offer them skills and tools to be safer in the way that they engage in chemsex. The approach with harm reduction is that the therapist engages with the client in a non-judgmental way, and governments in many countries understand that people are going to use drugs. So overall, it is far better to reduce those harms than to have a all-out "we say no to drugs" policy. Three of the big benefits for a harm reduction approach are that it empowers a person to better take control of their chemsex behavior. The quality of life for the individual and also for communities is improved, and also there is less chance of transmission of HIV, Hep C, gonorrhea, syphilis, and other sexually transmitted infections. So now I'm going to talk in more detail about applying harm reduction to specific aspects of chemsex. But two of the most important approaches before I get into that is that a user, A, should never use alone, and should also always make a habit of buying their drugs from the same dealer or a known person so that they know that the quality is safe. So the first aspect of chemsex I'm going to talk about in regard to harm reduction is the use of GHB or GBL. So first of all, it's important to set an idea in your mind of how much of the GHB or GBL you're going to use in a particular session, and see if you can make sure that you stop when that amount of GHB has been used. The second one is to set time limits for when you take a dose of G. So typically most people find it safest to leave a 2 to 3 hour gap. And so also, if you are using G, it's really important to do your own doses, because otherwise, if you're taking G from other people, it's very easy to fall into taking G earlier than the 2 hour time period. And obviously the high risk of that is of overdose. It's really important that if you're on medication or you're on HIV medication to take a smaller dose of GHB, because it can interact with that medication and also lead to an overdose. Sleeping tablets is another medication that a person can take that if you mix it with GHB or GBL can lead you to an overdose. It's also important to know that GHB and GBL have different strengths or concentrations. Often GBL is the stronger one, and so especially if you're getting your drugs off the same dealer, it's really important to check with them what is the dose or what is a safe dose for this, and especially when you're taking the safe first dose is maybe take a little bit less than what's been suggested until you get a sense of how that liquid interacts with your body makeup. The most common dose of GHB is going to be somewhere between 0.5 0.5 mils and 2 mils of GHB per session. It's not a good idea to go higher than that. Also, it's going to be very helpful to know that you should never mix alcohol and GHB, as this can be fatal. Don't accept GHB or GBL from someone in a club, or if you're at home at a ChemSex party and you don't know the strength of their GHB or GBL, as that can also be quite dangerous. And finally, the last two harm reduction approaches to using GHB is that it's really important to always be using with other people. If you're at a ChemSex party and people begin to leave, it's important to stop using GHB as soon as you're the only person there. And also, what a lot of people do is they'll use a dropper bottle or a syringe that has a label of how much you're using, so that you know how much you're using each time. The next aspect of ChemSex I'm going to talk about in regard to harm reduction is crystal meth use. So first of all, with injecting, some tips or skills here to apply is never inject below the waist, never inject into hands or feet, never inject into a swollen or sore area. Also, vary your injecting sites as much as you possibly can. And after injecting, apply pressure so that the bleeding will stop. Some further safe injecting tips include always inject with someone else, always use a clean syringe or put your name on a syringe if you're at a ChemSex party, dispose of any injecting paraphernalia like swabs or syringes or needles safely, and also make sure that hands are washed before an injection takes place and afterwards as well, and never share a tourniquet. The other drug that's used a lot in ChemSex is called methadone, and when taking this drug, it can be quite irritating to the lining of the nose or to the throat. And a lot of people will snort this drug, but it can really create wounds or cuts in the nose. So often the best way to take it is to put it into a capsule or wrap it in something that is easily digestible and to swallow it. At the 2019 ChemSex conference in Paris, there were different workers there offering what they called a PIP pack. And a PIP pack is a pack of different resources that a person can take with them to a ChemSex party. And it includes things like lubricant, syringes, condoms, ambulance phone numbers, and information about legal issues in case you're arrested or if you see something going on at a sex party that doesn't seem quite right. And also information about taking fluids and eating and information like this. So these PIP packs are a very good resource for the chemsexer who's wanting to apply a harm reduction approach. Other resources that are going to help BT MSMs approach sex in a safer way, or chemsex in a safer way, is to be educated about viral and bacterial infections and STIs and how they are transmitted, to make sure that you're checking condoms on a regular basis throughout a chemsex episode for breakages. Also, to set a time limit on how long you are partying for, so that you can make sure that you're eating when you need to eat or drinking fluids when you need to, and also going to sleep when you need to. Also, providing workshops for chemsexers is really important by different organisations to educate people about all the harm reduction strategies. And also having a designated sober person at a chemsex party is really important. Sometimes people are not really going to want to be in that environment when they're the only sober person. But if there is someone who is willing to be sober and oversee what's going on, that can be very helpful as well. Two suggestions for people who are engaging in long sex episodes or fisting, for example, are to check for sores and cuts on the hand before engaging in this kind of sex. Also checking for condoms, whether there are any breakages in the condom. And also often using your own lubricant will lessen the chance of less blood or anal mucus causing contamination. In regard to water sports and sex toys, with water sports, it's a very low chance of passing on HIV infection, and many website pages will tell you no risk. In regard to dildos, butt plugs and fleshlights, these do have the chance to pass over infection, so it's really important after using them to wash them with warm soapy liquid or sterilizing liquid as well. And often if you're playing with them during a ChemSex episode, to use condoms on them as well if you can. If you're working in an organisation that wants to take a harm reduction approach, then some of the things that you can do is to provide drug testing for people when they bring their drugs in, safe slamming kits. So I think I mentioned them before when I talked about the PIP pack, and also sending harm reduction workers into party spaces, saunas, and sometimes nightclubs. Mainline, which is an organisation in Amsterdam, often will send their workers to sex clubs or saunas just to gently talk to clients who are wanting to talk to them and giving out information about harm reduction approaches. Some organisations run harm reduction approached programs which can last anywhere from 5 to 10 weeks, each week with a different topic. And people who are really not wanting to take an abstinence approach find these kind of groups really helpful for when they're trying to change their chemsex behaviour. And I'm just going to give you a list of names of different organisations that will offer drug testing kits on their websites or harm reduction information on their websites. And these include Mainline in Amsterdam, which I just mentioned before, the GMHC, which is in New York City, the Terence Higgins Trust in London, 5016 Street, which is in London as well, and also at davidstewart.org. There's loads of information there about harm reduction approaches. So talking about organisations and what an organisation can do to help a chemsex take a harm reduction approach to chemsex is to use the example of Le Spot. There are two Le Spot agencies. One is in Paris and one is in Marseille, and they were both opened around 2016. These are places that gay men can go to talk about their chemsex behaviour. They will offer both harm reduction and abstinence approaches depending on what the person wants. It's peer-to-peer support, and so it's also a stigma-free environment, and the different people going there to talk about chemsex will get a lot of identification as they sit in groups and talk about their chemsex experiences. They also do HIV rapid testing there. They also help people get onto PrEP as well. Most people say that one of the powerful aspects of going to Le Spot is that they get to talk in groups about different aspects of chemsex, and some of these aspects will include harm reduction, sexuality, pleasure, self-esteem, addiction, how to deal with cravings, and also the consequences of their chemsex behaviour on their social lives. Now we're going to move on to what is abstinence. Abstinence is an approach to dealing with chemsex that really means the person stops engaging in both their problematic sexual behaviour or drug behaviours completely. Often a person will choose abstinence when they have tried harm reduction approaches and found that they are not working. 12-step programs are a bit of an enigma to the rest of the world and people who don't understand them. But there are some really important ways in which they support a BT-MSM person to get sober and stay sober. So one of the first features is having a sponsor. So a sponsor is a person who has more sober time than you, usually at least 1 year. They've experienced difficulties in their recovery, but they've maintained their sobriety despite that. They also usually have a working knowledge of the 12-step literature, and they're able to help a person work through the 12 steps and give them support along the way. The second aspect of 12-step program is the steps, and in the original AA literature, the steps are basically called a design for living. So essentially the first 3 steps, you can either write on them or work through them with your sponsor, but they are about accepting your powerlessness and unmanageability around drug use behavior. And then the other 2 steps are about connecting with a higher power, which is not a religious concept. It can be anything that the person wants it to be. The steps following that are about looking at our behavior and the things in our lives that are not working. And then they're about making restoration to people that we've harmed, basically in a sense to take away the shame and the guilt that we've been feeling while we've been engaging in problematic, say, drug and sex behaviors. And without that guilt and shame, it means that it's a lot easier for a person to stay sober. And then step 10 is about looking at our lives on a daily basis to make sure that everything is in order and we're not accumulating any negative feelings again. And then step 11 is about incorporating spirituality aspects of meditation and prayer into our lives, which act as a way of soothing ourselves and giving us a reprieve from distress when it arises in our lives. And then the final one is step 12, which is carrying the message of recovery or abstinence recovery to the still suffering addict. And so the steps basically are in this way designed for living. The next aspect of 12 step that is really important is going to meetings. So meetings are the place where you meet other men, or it can also be women, where you are going to make connections, you're going to find a sponsor, you're going to identify with other people's stories, and you're going to actually find that it's possible to enjoy life without using drugs, not only by listening to other people's stories and listening to how they live their lives, but also by developing a friendship circle of people that you can depend on and have as you move forward in your sobriety. Sometimes in 12-step you're going to make friends, but sometimes people will simply become your peers. And the difference between the difference between a peer and a friend is that friends are obviously people we identify with and we have a laugh with and we start to do activities outside the 12-step group with. But peers are people who come into the program at a similar time of us, and they are sort of working their way through recovery and facing the same challenges that we are. And so we might not go and hang out with them or spend time with them outside the 12-step program, but we will connect with them within meetings and enjoy their company and their sharing of their experiences within the meetings. I think the other important thing here is that with the sponsor, becoming a sponsor will usually happen after you've been in the program for 1 year. It's a sort of understood idea that the first year is about the addict getting sober, and once they are stable and sober, then they're able to give back, helping other people. The next aspect of 12-step programs is the service element, and this means volunteering. And often an addict, when they arrive at a 12-step program, are very used to taking and not giving back to the community. And so there are many different ways within the 12-step program that you can be of service. It could be packing up chairs at the end of a meeting and putting them to the side of a room. It could be bringing the tea and coffee and serving it out. Or it can be in a more complex way, which is serving on another meeting group who decides how the meetings are going to run in different fellowships in different places. Not all people need a 12-step program to remain abstinent. There are some people who are able to achieve abstinence without it. And I'm just going to read a letter to you written by someone who was able to maintain sobriety whilst not going to a 12-step program. And he says, "I did attend meetings, SMART meetings and Recovery Dharma, which was formerly called Refuge Recovery. Meetings, both of which I found very helpful. SMART Recovery, particularly in London, is full of people who didn't fit with 12-step, so it's a good thing to recommend as an alternative. I facilitated my local SMART meeting for a while, and that really helped. People being reliant on me turning up stopped me from getting fucked up. Recovery Dharma is Buddhist inspired, and I still attend, and also attended a weekly drop-in at an LGBT drugs charity called Antidote. The community of staff and service users that helped me enormously. The standard 12-step advice of phoning someone and asking for help is something I've at times really not been good at, but I do think it's some of the best advice, and it helped me when I did. The other things that helped me are regular psychotherapy, volunteering for a local drug and alcohol service, practicing yoga and meditation, confiding in a couple of close friends exactly what was going on for me, asking for help from family and friends, a regular gratitude practice, regular journaling, attending gay men's personal development workshops helped teach me that there are healthy ways of connecting with other gay men. One of these is called www.lovingmen.org. My HIV clinic has also been really helpful by being open-minded and clued up about chemsex, and for never shaming me in any way, which made it easy to be upfront about what was going on. Also, receiving Hep C treatment from that clinic was life-changing, because having a co-infection was a massive driver behind the reason I engaged in chemsex. The main thing it has taken is time to rebuild a meaningful life, including a meaningful profession. I have found the more meaning I experience in my day-to-day life, the easier it becomes to stay sober, to enjoy that. I think the most important thing when people are really wanting to change their chemsex behaviour is finding out whether they want to approach with harm reduction or with abstinence. Once a person is stable, then that person can explore other treatment modalities. And some of those modalities might include EMDR, which is a approach to dealing with trauma, which desensitizes difficult trauma memories. Inner child work, which is about going back in time with the client to look at incidents that happened. It's quite a complex approach that I really don't have time to go into here, but a lot of people will find that that's quite helpful. There's also somatic experiencing and brain spotting, which again are ways of taking the energy and intensity out of stored difficult feelings and trauma from the past. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which many people know what this is, but essentially it's thought stopping, finding a way to stop really problematic, difficult thoughts, and oftentimes creating new positive approaches. And DBT, which is similar to CBT, it's also about dealing with difficult thoughts and finding different ways to be able to tolerate the difficult feelings and noticing that they still exist. And then finally, a lot of chemsexers will benefit from having a sex addiction therapist, and this allows them to work on their drug addiction problems while also working through their sex addiction issues at the same time. If you have any further questions about how to help someone who wants to change their chemsex behaviour, I'm going to leave my website and also my Instagram handle and also some really helpful links at the end of this video.